All right, well, thanks everyone for joining me today. I'm going to talk about resources for teaching and learning JMP. And I think this is it's going to sort of be a data dump for a lot of information, a lot of resources that we have available. So I want to start this by just telling you, if you only remember 3 things, here's the things that I really want you to take away. Definitely use the built-in JMP help. I'm going to show you a lot of things that are built into the JMP help. You can see my JMP menu bar along the top. I'm talking about this built-in help menu. So definitely, if you remember only a couple things from this, use this JMP help. Tons of the resources we'll talk about are buried in here. Also, jump.com/teach, our academic website, has a lot of the other resources that I'll talk about. So go to the JMP help, go to jump.com/teach, and those are the 2 main places that I'd like you to remember from this webinar. And then also this recording and my journal that I'm using, so this piece that I have open here, and all the links that I'm embedding here will be available at jump.com/teach. If you click on academic webcasts and then go to academic webinar library, you'll be able to register for other webcasts on the academic webcast page, and you'll also be able to view other recorded webinars, and this webinar will be posted along with the journal, so you'll be able to go back and all the notes that I'm including here. So as I open some of these disclosure pieces, you'll see that there's a lot of information that I'm about to throw at you, and so you can come back and access this later. And then certainly if you have questions, send emails to academic@jump.com, or you can send emails directly to me at ruth.hummel@jump.com, and I'd be happy to direct you to the resources that you're looking for. So one more tip as I'm going through this and showing you so many things that are available, I would suggest watching this with sort of the goals that you have in mind, and then sort of tune out when I'm talking about things that aren't exactly what you need right now, and come back and watch the video later when you're ready to absorb a little more information. So if, for example, you're going to teach a class on regression, try to focus on the tools that I show you that are really going to be especially relevant first, and pick out a couple of things that are going to be the first resources that you want to go to, and then come back later on when you're ready to absorb a little bit more of this and dig a little deeper, because we have so many resources, especially for academics, available on our website and in the built-in help, and I think you're going to really like them. Okay, to get us started, I'm just going to open a JMP data table and some output. And if you've never used JMP before, this is what a JMP data table looks like. It's a spreadsheet type data table, and there's a little bit of extra information on the side about the columns and the rows. This SAT by year data set is one of approximately 500 data sets that ship with JMP, and so it comes installed in your copy of JMP. And this data set contains information on average SAT scores and some related information, average for the 50 US states plus the District of Columbia. And there's the information is collected over years from 1992 to 2004. With some of the variables like expenditure, you can see here it has the same value for all the years because this value is actually the 1997 value. Okay, so that's a little bit about what this data set is, and let's look at some output from this data. Here's the distribution platform, so this would have been launched from Analyze and then Distribution. And this is showing a little bit of information on 3 of the variables, SAT Verbal, SAT Math, and the region. So a few things that you want to know about JMP if you haven't used it before. Number 1, it's focused on visualization. So whenever possible, JMP is going to give you a visual of the data. It's also dynamic and interactive, which means as I click around and explore data, it's going to interact with all the other plots that I have open and back in the original data table. So as I'm clicking on, for example, the mountain region states are going to get highlighted back in the data table. And also JMP is context dependent. So this means that the analysis and the visualization options that JMP presents are dependent on the modeling type of the variables that are involved. So you can see here that in this distribution output, you get different output for the SAT verbal variable than you do for the region. So SAT verbal and SAT math are both continuous, so we're getting continuous type output, things that you'd measure on a continuous variable, like the mean, the median, some quantile information, etc. Whereas region is nominal categorical, and so we're getting information that you would get for a categorical variable here for region. And this is another thing I want to point out if you haven't used JMP before. You want to use the red triangles whenever possible because there's always more drill down options that are going to be relevant to that context. So as I said, JMP is context dependent. And so here you're going to get things like test a mean or fit a normal distribution to this data. Whereas under the categorical variable region, I'm going to get things like test a probability. And so you're going to get different options in different places, and this is the context-dependent nature of JMP. So you certainly want to make sure that the modeling type, and the modeling type is indicated by these little icons on the side, the modeling type is correct in order to give you the right context for your variables. JMP is also very flexible in allowing you to visually explore data in a variety of ways, very quickly and interactively. So here in Graph Builder, if I take a few variables and pull them into the middle, JMP is going to make the best guess of what to do with all of these variables when I drop them here, or I could take one variable at a time and drag them around to different parts of the plot and see what my options would be in Graph Builder. So I can very quickly look at a variety of ways to explore this data. I can also use this ribbon at the top to see other ways of visualizing these data. And when I'm happy with a plot, I can click Done, I can export my plot. And in addition, JMP is also visual and dynamic from the perspective of being able to see trends over time and add additional dimensions to our visualizations, like adding a time as a fourth dimension with a bubble plot. Here I could click on one of these points. I could split that out and see what happens over time for the two subgroups of the South. It seems like there's two distinct subgroups. So there's a lot you can do with JMP. Let's also very briefly talk about the JMP family of products. If you're using JMP as an academic, there's a good chance that you're using our JMP Academic Suite, which would be a department or a campus-wide license of JMP. In that case, you'll be using JMP 13 or JMP 13 Pro. We're in version 13 that just came out in September. And JMP and JMP Pro are both a part of the Academic Suite license. And JMP and JMP Pro run on both Mac and Windows. All of JMP's products work on Mac and Windows. In addition to the Academic Suite, you also get free access to our e-learning courses, which I'll show you in a little while as well. And then there's a third version of JMP. So there's regular JMP, JMP Pro, and there's also JMP Student Edition. If you're using a textbook that comes bundled with the software, it is probably JMP Student Edition that you're using in that case. And there are two other products as well, JMP Clinical and JMP Genomics. There's an exception to JMP running on Mac. JMP Clinical and JMP Genomics come bundled with SAS components that are required to run them, and so JMP Clinical and JMP Genomics run on Windows and not on Mac natively. I run them on my Mac, but using Parallels in order to access the Windows. Okay, now let's talk about some of the resources that are built into JMP in the Help menu. So we'll talk about getting help from the Help menu in JMP. So here in the JMP toolbar from Help, there are a number of really helpful resources. So let's talk first about the JMP documentation. That's in JMP is called Books. Our documentation hides under this tab called Books and is split up sort of by platform or the type of analysis that you're looking at. So if you want to learn more about essential graphing, about Graph Builder, you click on Essential Graphing. If you want to learn more about predictive and specialized models, click on that book. Okay, in addition, there's a searchable JMP help. So if I click on this JMP help and look for example, a 3D scatter plot, I can search for 3D scatter plot and find a number of places in the documentation that there's information about a 3D scatter plot. So under the help, again, the documentation is the books. And there's a lot of examples and a lot of information hidden in there that's really useful. And then the searchable help is this JMP help. And then let's also open up that SAT data set again. So I'm just going to open a recent file, the SAT by year data set. And let's quickly pull up the distribution again for maybe a few of these variables. And if I'm looking at something when I have a platform open and I'm looking at a report in JMP, if I have a question about something that I'm seeing, a question about a figure or a number, I can use this little question mark and put the question mark on top of the thing I'm curious about. So maybe I don't know what this diamond is inside of this box plot, or maybe I just have a question about how this box plot is being calculated. So I can click on that question mark, I can hover the question mark over what I want and then click. And this is going to open up help that's related to that figure that I was just looking at. So the question mark from within a platform is one way to get help within an analysis or a report. Another way is to use the hover help. So if, for example, I want to test a mean, but I'm not sure what this means, if I hover my mouse over this, I get some extra information. So for test mean, it says calculates a t-test for mu equals mu naught, or a z-test if the standard deviation is known. So the hover help, if I hover my mouse somewhere, it's going to often give me a little extra information that's sort of a clue to what's going on. Okay, also in the help menu, so we talked about the searchable help, we talked about the documentation. Also in the help menu, we have the statistics index and the scripting index. These are helpful. So the statistics index is where you want to go if you know the name of an analysis and you aren't sure where to find it. So again, JMP is context dependent and presents a lot of options in these red triangles. If you don't know the context that the test you want is going to be found in, if you just want to know what platform, where would I find a 3D scatter plot, you can click on 3D scatter plot. So search through for the term that you're looking for, and you can look for the topic help and get more help information. You can also click to run an example, and it's going to open a data set in the background and then show you the output here of a 3D scatter plot. Or you can click launch in order to launch the platform where you'd get a 3D scatter plot. And in this case, there is actually a 3D scatter plot platform. So in addition to the scripting, or to the statistics index, there's also a scripting index. So you saw in the statistics index, you saw what the JMP scripting language looks like. So this is the scripting language that's behind the scenes. Every time you're pointing and clicking on something, JMP is writing out this JSL code in the background. So if you want to get familiar with the JSL code and start writing JSL code yourself, if, for example, you want to personalize some type of analysis, make something repeatable and write an add-in, for example, that contains that repeatable analysis so that you can just click on it in the future to repeat it. So if you want to learn some scripting language, if you go to the help and to the scripting index, this is where you can find snippets of code that will teach you how to do certain things. And so you'll see the example code over here. Again, you can click Run Example, you can click Topic Help to get more information about this, but this is a great place if you're just getting started in the scripting language, or if you're well versed in the scripting language, but there's a specific thing that you don't yet know how to do and you want to see an example snippet of code, this is where you'd find that. Okay, also in the help menu, so we talked about the JMP help is a searchable help tool, the books is the documentation for JMP. We talked about the scripting index and statistics index. The sample data library and sample data we'll talk about in a second. These are incredibly helpful. Also the tip of the day. When you first open JMP, the tip of the day will automatically show up. A lot of times when you're beginning using JMP, you may not be ready to absorb these yet, but when you're ready to go back and learn, these are a bunch of really helpful tips that help you use JMP a lot more efficiently and effectively. So from here you can flip through all of the tips. There are 58 tips available in JMP 13. And so you can learn to, for example, resizing graphs, to resize several similar graphs at the same time, hold the command key and resize one of them, and then everything else gets the exact same function applied to it. So some of these tips make doing repeatable things a lot faster. So you'll get a lot more effective in JMP by learning some of these tips. And so the tip of the day is another place to go back to once you're getting a little more familiar with JMP and you want to get more effective and more efficient. The tutorials are also a fantastic tool. When I was teaching with JMP, I liked to ask my students to use the beginner's tutorial just as the very first way that they would ever be looking at JMP data. And so this is just, it takes about 5 minutes to go through it. It tells you some very basic things like that JMP is based with these disclosure icons. And so it just shows you how to click on disclosure icons. And so this tutorial just walks you through a number of very simple things about how JMP works so that after 5 minutes, you're pretty comfortable with navigating JMP. Also in the tutorials, are a tutorial on how to do a test of one mean, or of two means, or of many means, of paired means. There's a tutorial on using Graph Builder, a tutorial on using Design of Experiments platform, and a partition tutorial. These are fantastic. They have specific examples. So if I click on one mean, there's a hypothetical problem. So there's a motivation here. And so in this case, the example is the company is drawing 30 sample bags of candy randomly from its production line. And so you're testing against the industry average is 6.5 ounces. So this is a motivated problem that walks you through exactly how to compare a sample mean to a constant in JMP. So these are really great places if you're teaching introductory statistics and you're using JMP to do it. Using these tutorials, asking your students to go through these tutorials is a great way to have your students understand how to do exactly that type of test in JMP. And they have motivated examples, so they're actually exactly the type of thing you might want to cover in a class. And in this case, you can assign them to your student. The user community is an online community that we'll talk about a little later, but you can also get to it from in the help. This is just going to launch the online user community. And now let's talk about the sample data and the sample data library. So the sample data and sample data library are taking you to the same thing. Sample data library is just a library of the file names of all the sample data sets that ship with JMP. So there's about 500 sample data sets that ship with JMP, and they're just organized by alphabetically in the sample data library. From sample data, those same sample data sets are organized in a more helpful way if you're teaching. So if you're teaching and you want to teach ANOVA, for example, we've chosen some data sets that we think demonstrate specific ANOVA type analyses. So if you want to teach two-way ANOVA, the analgesics is a great data set to illustrate two-way ANOVA. If you want to do bivariate, so regression type situations, or ANOVA from these data sets, so the bivariate analysis, ANOVA, and including even more complicated models like mixed models. So if you're teaching mixed models and you want to demonstrate expected mean squares versus REML, the machine data is a great example for that, great data set example. So the data are organized in the sample data. So from help, sample data library is just the names of the files. From sample data, they're organized in these topics, or also by general field. So if you wanted to medical studies, you wanted examples that are from the medical field, you can find some examples here. From sports, you can find some examples here. And then down here in these teaching resources, I'm going to spend a lot of time showing you some of these teaching resources. These are some of the really fantastic things that are built into JMP to help you, especially if you're teaching. Okay, so we've covered what's the main topics that are in the help menu. We're definitely going to spend a lot of time in this sample data, which I have open here, specifically in these teaching resources. So here we've gone to help and to sample data. And so examples for teaching are, again, just some of those data sets that you can find in the sample data library that we think are specifically really great examples for teaching. And so again, this is the type of analysis we think is a great idea to use that data set for. And then the teaching scripts, this is another thing that I loved when I was teaching with JMP. I find that teaching a sampling distribution or explaining the central limit theorem, these are really difficult concepts for someone to grasp the first time that they're seeing them. And so if you can use an applet or a demo that's illustrating exactly what's going on, that's going to make that much more meaningful to your students. So I love this sampling distribution of sample means, for example. What we're doing here is saying, what is the underlying true population? So if the shape of the true population is normal, we can select normal, or if we want something skewed right or uniform, or we can use our own data set and use the distribution, the empirical distribution from our own data set. So maybe I'll choose a skewed right distribution, and maybe the mean of my distribution is 200 and the standard deviation is 20. I can change the name of my variable. I can change the sample size. Maybe I'll make the sample size 30. And first I'll start by drawing just one sample. So I'll click on this Draw Additional Samples. And in the top box, I see the picture of my first sample. I see the mean of that sample, the standard deviation of that sample, and I see that this is just sample number 1. And then the bottom plot, I see the distribution of the sample means. So this is the sampling distribution of the sample means. Here I see the mean of the sample means. Right now, my mean of sample means here is the same as my mean from my one sample because I only have one mean so far. I have no standard deviation right now because I only have one observation in this distribution, and I only have one sample mean. And so I can draw additional samples to start building this distribution. Now I have a standard deviation down here because I have 2 observations, so I'm able to calculate a standard deviation. If I keep drawing samples, it's going to show me the last sample up here, and then it's going to build the sampling distribution from all of the samples down here. And if I want to do this a lot faster, I can change the number of samples to say 100 and draw 100 at a time. And so I can build my sampling distribution of the sample mean. So I can show the students, first of all, there's a population in the background, then I get sample data, and then my third distribution of interest is the distribution of sample means. And so we have information about the underlying population, the specific sample, and the theoretical distribution of sample means if we were taking samples repeatedly. So this is a very helpful applet built right into the to JMP software to show that concept of sampling distribution of sample means. Likewise, there's a confidence interval for the mean or the population proportion. So I'll show you the confidence interval for the population proportion. Here, I know the true population proportion is perhaps 0.2. I have category names, so I'll just leave these the same right now. I can again change the sample size. I can change the number of samples that I'm taking, but I'll start by just taking one. I can use a continuity correction if I'm showing how that makes an impact. So right now I'll just draw one sample. And so in my first sample, I have my category blue or not blue. There were 13 that were blue, 37 that were not blue, for a total sample size of 50. And here's my sample proportions. And then here's my first confidence interval. And I can see the line across the chart at 0.2, which is the true population proportion. And so what I'm looking at is how often my confidence interval from a random sample is going to capture the true population proportion. And so the little lines turn red when they failed to capture the true population proportion. So I can explain that a 95% confidence interval is really saying if I could do this repeatedly over and over and over again, a 95% confidence interval is a confidence interval that's wide enough that I believe that 95% of the time it will actually capture the true population proportion, and that 5% of the time I'll have these little red confidence intervals that didn't in fact capture it. So these demos are built right in, and you can find them here in the interactive teaching modules. You can also download them so that they'll show up here in the JMP menu bar as add-ins. So you can access them easily from the help menu, but if you are teaching with these regularly and you want to be able to get to them with fewer clicks, you can download the whole package as an add-in, and I'll show you where that is in a little bit. So the interactive teaching modules are here. The teaching demonstrations are right here. So if you, for example, want to talk about, if you want to show a dot plot, dot plots are something we're often asked for, and dot plots are not native to JMP. So there's a dot plot demo here if you want your students to create dot plots. The demo least squares is a great demo for talking about what it means when you're fitting a regression line with the method of least squares. And so here the data points are these little black points. These little boxes allow me to move the line. So I can try to move this line around to where I think it fits the data the best. So the first thing I might have students do is try to wiggle this line around to where they think it's the best fit. And so then I can calculate my squares, which is looking at each point, the distance the point is away from the line, and then squaring that distance. So it's actually showing me visually, here's the distance, and then squaring that distance. And then it's showing me the sum of all those squares. And then if I wanted to calculate the actual least squares line, I can click this button so you can see the blue true least squares line shows up, and so you can see how well I did in comparison to the true value. The truest least squares is here where this little black line is, just below 200, and my line was pretty close. I can also take a point and drag the point and see how that's going to impact the least squares and where the best fit least squares line goes. I can click on things about my squares and my residuals, and I can delete points. I can put a correlation ellipse on this. So this demo of least squares is really helpful when you're teaching regression by the method of least squares to actually visualize what's going on with that. Okay, under the calculators, there are calculators calculating the test statistics and information. So when you're teaching in intro stats and you're teaching the method of how to calculate a confidence interval for one mean, you can have the students using raw data or summary statistics from a homework problem. So if I choose summary statistics, I can say what was the sample average, what was the population standard deviation, what was the sample size, and then it's going to calculate for me either a Z or a T test. So the calculators are helpful when you have summarized data or raw data and you want to just calculate a T test or a Z test for those common situations, hypothesis tests and confidence intervals that you talk about in introductory statistics. The simulations is also great. So the central limit theorem, if I open this, it tells me here in the notes what I need to do. I need to add 30 to 100 rows and use analyze distribution to see how the distribution becomes more normal as n increases. So if I go to rows and add 30 rows, and then I go to analyze distribution and look at all of these guys, and maybe I'll just look at only the histograms. I can see that as the sample size gets larger, so n equals 100, I'm getting closer and closer to a normal distribution. Whereas when my sample size was 1, I pretty much keep the population distribution. So there's a number of really excellent resources here hiding in the teaching resources. Again, you go to help, you go to sample data, and then to these teaching resources. Okay, so we've talked about the JMP sample data and scripts. Let's talk about a couple of other teaching aids as well. So I'm going to open another data set, this fitness data set, and I'm going to run the distribution platform on a couple of things. Maybe we'll just pick a few variables. So here I have a few variables, and let's say for age, I want to do a test of one mean on age. So I want to test the mean. We can see that the sample mean for the age variable here is 47.6. And so if I wanted to test that mean against a hypothesized value, maybe I want to test that against 47. I believe the true average age in the data was in the population was 47. I can click here if I want a non-parametric test as well. I can enter this true standard deviation if I know that, but when do we ever know the true standard deviation of the population? So I can say okay. And what I want to show you down here is this p-value, illustration of the p-value. So we automatically built into this platform, we have a picture of what's happening with the p-value. So here was my test. I was hypothesizing my null distribution is centered at 47. I'm hypothesizing that the true population mean is 47. The actual estimated sample mean is 47.6774. And here's my t-test statistic, 0.7167, so I'm 0.7 standard deviations above the hypothesized mean. Here's my two-sided p-value. Here's my one-sided upper p-value. Here's my one-sided lower p-value. And then here you can see a sort of red line, and then the p-value illustrated. So the probability of being this great or greater is in this dark blue, or the two-sided, this great or greater from the absolute value perspective, and is shaded as well. But if I use this little red triangle, I can get a p-value animation or a power animation as well. So the p-value animation shows me the black line is showing me in the sample, so it's a fixed value. I can't control what happened in the sample. In the sample, I got an estimated mean of 47.6774, so that's fixed. I can't do anything about that. But if I changed what I was testing against, if I changed my hypothesized mean, where I believe the true population value is, I can move that around by clicking on this little box. And you can see as I move it, that the t ratio and the p-value change because that fixed sample statistic is now at a different place in the hypothesized distribution. So if I'm hypothesizing a value of 45.68, then I have a t ratio of 2.1, so that the sample mean is more than 2 standard deviations above my hypothesized mean, and my p-value is 0.04 if I'm looking at the two-sided, or if I just want to look at the upper side, my p-value is 0.02171. So students can play around with what the meaning of the p-value is and what the test is actually doing. I can also change the sample size here. So what would have happened if my sample size had been larger instead of 31 if it was 50? So I can see how that changes the underlying distribution as well. So under this test mean, we had the p-value animation. We also have a power animation that does the same thing. Now I have sliders for both the true population and for my hypothesized distribution. Okay, so we talked about under help, the tutorials, that's a great place for students to go to get some motivated examples. We talked about the p-value animator and the power animator. There's also one-click bootstrapping anywhere that you have statistics data. So the mean is being calculated here, the standard deviation. If I, on my Mac, control click on top of this data, so anywhere you're seeing a data table. So if I created a regression and I have the slope and intercept and p-values in a table, anywhere that I see something like that, I can right click or control click on my Mac and I can select Bootstrap if I want to get a Bootstrap confidence interval for that statistic or that information. So in this case, let's do something small so this doesn't run for very long. So I'll ask for 100 Bootstrap samples. I'll say OK. So JMP very quickly takes the raw data and resamples with replacement. So each Bootstrap ID is a different sample, and each sample is the same raw data but sampled with replacement. So the sample size stays the same, but some of the values might get reselected a number of times. Some values might not be selected at all in that particular Bootstrap sample. So then it calculates again that same table of information. And so then we can click on distribution to see, for example, the mean. So here's the distribution of the sample mean from those Bootstrap samples. And so the confidence interval is down here. A 95% coverage Bootstrap confidence interval for the sample mean is from 46.17 to 49.67. So this one-click bootstrapping is very easy. Anytime you see a table of output, of statistical output like this. So I'll give you one more example. If we looked at a regression, for example, so fit y by x, and I'm regressing, let's say oxygen uptake is my response, and I'm doing this based on age. I say OK. I use the red triangle to fit a line. And here where I have the parameter estimates, if I wanted to get a Bootstrap-based confidence interval for this intercept estimate or for this age estimate, again, I can right-click or control-click, select Bootstrap, ask for the number of Bootstrap samples, and it's going to, again, sample with replacement from my raw data, recalculate the intercept and age estimates, and then I'll be able to look at a Bootstrap confidence interval for those estimates. Okay, another very powerful tool for teaching and for understanding concepts is the profiler. So I'm going to open another data set. This is the Titanic passengers data set. In this data set, we have information on 1,309 passengers from the Titanic. We know whether or not they survived. We know some information about them, like what passenger class they were, first, second, or third class. We know if they're male or female. We know their age. We know how many siblings and spouses they were traveling with, how many parents and children they were traveling with, and then a number of other pieces of information like their ticket number, how much they paid for their ticket, etc. So if I wanted to fit a model with this, I could go to Analyze. I could use Fit Y by X if I were only choosing one response and one predictor, or I can choose Fit Model if I want multiple responses or multiple predictors. So if I want to choose that survived is what I'm predicting, and I want to base that maybe on passenger class and sex and age. Maybe some of these other variables are important as well, but I'll keep it a sort of simple model. And I want, in this case, to include some interaction effects. So maybe I want to include all the main effects for passenger class, sex, and age, and I also want to include the two-way interactions between all of these variables. Then I can select this macros button, and you can see that it says degree 2. So if I choose macros and say factorial to degree, it's going to be factorial up to all the two-way interactions because degree is 2 here. So here I have the main effects and all the two-way interactions. I'm going to change the target level to 1 so that I'm predicting survival. I'm going to click Run. So here again, if I see estimates and I want to bootstrap confidence intervals, I can control click and I can select Bootstrap, so that's available everywhere. I can also go to this red triangle and select this profiler. So the profiler is a fantastic teaching tool. It's also helpful when you're doing research and you're trying to understand the results of your model, but it's especially helpful for explaining interaction effects. So I'm going to show you this profiler, and I want you to notice that the things that were significant in this model, we had passenger class was the most significant effect, sex was the next most significant effect, and then the interaction between passenger class and sex is the next most significant effect, and then these other effects as well. So we have an interaction between passenger class and sex that is significant. So I'm going to expand the size of these a little bit so it's a little easier to see. And what we have here in this prediction profiler is we're seeing the prediction of how likely you are to survive. So the prediction at the moment, so these little red crosshairs are saying I'm looking at passenger class 1, sex female, and age 29.881. So for this condition, for a first class female passenger who's about 30 years old, the chance of survival is this 96%. If I drag this down to the next level, now I've dropped to 90% survival, and drag down, now I've dropped to 45% survival. So this prediction profiler allows you to explore the model and what the significant terms actually mean in your model. So the fact that passenger class is significant is saying that there is really a difference in what your survival chance is depending on your passenger class. Passenger class makes a statistically significant impact on your survival rate. Likewise, being female or male makes a significant impact on your survival rate. If you're passenger class 3, your chance of survival as female is 45%, but if you're passenger class 3 and you're male, you're only a 14% chance of survival. So there's a significant effect of passenger class. There's also a significant effect of sex and a significant effect of age. So if you're third class, you're male, and you're 30, your chance of survival is 14%. But if you were 4 years old, you have a 32% chance of survival. So we can see what these significant effects actually mean, that we're seeing what the difference on your chance of survival is. And we're also able to see between passenger class and sex visually what an interaction effect means. So because there's a significant interaction effect between passenger class and sex, we can actually see that the effect of being of passenger class, so the slope of this line, the effect that from changing from passenger class 1 to passenger class 2 to passenger class 3, how that trend happens is different if you're male than if you're female. So you can see visually that the lines move. When I switch between male and female, the line is not in the same place because there's a different impact on if you're male or if you're female, what the impact of passenger class is. So the prediction profiler is incredibly helpful for illustrating what your significant effects really mean, and also for calculating prediction. So if you wanted to know what is your chance of survival if you are second class, female, and 10 years old, I can enter a continuous variable here to just get exactly what the value is I want. So if you are second class female and 10 years old, your estimated chance of survival according to this model is 97.1%. Okay. So some of these teaching aids are very helpful when you're trying to explain what's happening behind the scenes in a model and what those significant terms really mean. Graph Builder, we should also talk about that as a tool as a teaching aid tool. So I'll pull open the SAT by year data set again and open Graph Builder. Graph Builder is a great place for students to explore what these variables, what options there are for visualizing the variables, and to explore the data and understand better what's really happening in the data set. So for example, if I take SAT Verbal and SAT Math as my X and Y, I can see a scatter plot of all the data. I can see this smooth line being fit. Maybe I don't want the smooth line. Maybe I want a fitted regression line. So I can fit just the regression line in here. When I'm choosing options from this ribbon in Graph Builder, I get more options for those on the side. So I have options related to just the points in the scatter plot. I have options related to the line of fit as well. So I could put the prediction interval on. I could put the equation onto the plot. I can put the R squared onto the plot, the mean square error onto the plot. So there's a lot of things here that I can do directly from Graph Builder. Generally, when I want statistical information, like the equation of a fitted line, the R squared, things that are statistical in nature, calculations, I generally will do those from Analyze. But there's a number of things you can get from Graph Builder as well in this exploratory way. So if I wanted to then explore does this line differ depending on what region you're in, I can drag region in and explore how does this plot look if I put region up here where I split on the x-axis by all the regions, or split on the y-axis by all the regions, or wrap by all the regions, or overlay all of the regions. Notice when I do this, the plot gets really busy because I'm seeing the equation, the root mean square error, and the R squared for each of these options. So maybe I would go down to the line of fit and take some of this off. Now I just see the equations. Or I could just color the points by what region they're in. So there's a number of things I can do here to help me explore data graphically, which is a great teaching tool. Okay, so these are all the resources that I wanted to talk about that are built into JMP. So again, go to the JMP help, and there's a ton of stuff here. The sample data is the place I would direct you to spend the most time hunting around if you're teaching. That's what we've got open right here with all these examples for teaching scripts, all the demos. A number of tools that are really valuable are right here. But let's now talk about what's on our web page. So we have an academic web page, jump.com/teach. So let's go there. I'm going to open a browser. And when you go to jump.com/teach, it's going to scroll you right past this top part. So this is our academic landing page. There's some really great stuff here in the gallery of JMP screenshots. If you're just curious what kinds of things JMP does, go to this JMP screenshots gallery to see some of the types of things you can do in JMP. JMP in 60 seconds is another great place if you're new to JMP and you just want to get some ideas about what kind of things JMP does. There's a link to our JMP academic community right here. But this is what I want to draw your attention to, is all these resources for learning and using JMP. So I'm going to walk you through each of these categories and just show you what's in these spots. So let's talk about the Getting Started videos really quickly. The Getting Started videos are some about 20 to 25 minute videos that talk about some basic things in JMP. So basic navigation, what sort of things you're going to do as you're learning JMP at the beginning. So the Getting Started videos is a great place to go for a new JMP user. But also from this page, you can get to the other featured series like the Mastering JMP webcasts or the Technically Speaking. If you're using JMP Genomics or Clinical, the Life Sciences series is going to be relevant to you to learning more about how to use those tools. So there's also our academic series is here. So this webcast and other webcasts like it you can get to from the academic webinar library. So we have academic webinars specifically for JMP basics for professors and students, and summary and analysis, visualization and graphics, prep and modeling, specific to academics. So to the type of things that you're going to likely be doing when you're teaching JMP with JMP, or you're a researcher doing academic research. Okay, the Learning Library is another tool that's incredibly valuable if you're teaching with JMP or you're just trying to learn how to do a specific method. So if, for example, you want to know how to, you're learning about regression. So if we click on the correlation and regression, we'll see all these one-page guides related to correlation and regression. So if you want to know how to I just need to get the correlation for some continuous variables, you can click on this one-page guide, which will bring up a one-page PDF that tells you an example data set to use in JMP and shows you exactly how to get the correlation, and you can follow along and get the same output. Sometimes there's a web tutorial as well, and there's always also a 2 to 3 minute video explaining exactly how to do this topic. So if you have a specific topic that you're interested in, a specific type of analysis, we have about, I think, 85 one-page guides in the Learning Library. So that's very valuable for if you're learning a topic, or if you're teaching and you want to pass out these PDFs to your students for the specific topics you're talking about. Okay, so we talked about getting started videos in the Learning Library. We talked about the academic webcasts as well. So the webcasts are also linked from this getting started videos. So the academic webcasts are on a variety of topics that are going to be especially relevant to academics. The case study library is another place. Like the Learning Library with examples, the case study library has more developed examples, motivated examples for a number of topics. I think there are about 30 case study examples, and you can download them in groups. If you're teaching, for example, business statistics, you can download all the business statistics case studies and data sets together, or regular statistics without the business perspective, or regular analytics case studies as groups. You can also find things individually. So again, if I were teaching regression, I can go to regression and find a number of topics on regression. So here's where I would download the case study and download the data set. And it tells me a little quick summary of the types of things that are going to be covered in that case study. So this specific case study is predicting year-end contributions in an employee fundraising drive. These are some of the JMP features that are demonstrated: creating a table and tabulate, using Graph Builder, using fit Y by X to do a bivariate regression, and using the fit model platform. And then some of the statistical and graphical tools used are looking at summary statistics, looking at a time series plot, a simple linear regression, and then pulling out the predicted values and prediction intervals. So you can see when you're teaching and you want some good teaching examples, or you want to assign some examples, there are data sets, there are motivated case studies, and again, there's about 30 of these. Along with other teaching tools to add into a course, there things you could assign to students. There are a number of JMP e-learning courses. If you have an academic license, then you have access to the e-learning courses for free. Feel free to send us an email if you want more information about this, or you want to get the access to these e-learning courses. We have had a number of academics who've assigned, this is a 2-hour self-paced e-learning course on just getting started with JMP. And at the end of the 2 hours, when you've completed this e-learning course, you get a certificate from it. So a lot of professors assign this 2-hour e-learning course as a first assignment in a statistics class, so that they know their students are familiar with JMP and ready to get started analyzing data. So each one of these e-learning courses prints with a certificate at the end, and you can see we give you an estimate of about how long we expect it to take to get through those particular topics. So these are fantastic, and again, they come with your academic suite license. There are also more JMP teaching materials that SAS Education has developed. So here on this side panel, I'll click on this JMP teaching materials to show you there are courses developed by SAS Education teaching in JMP for all of these topics. So again, if you're teaching regression, for example, you could request the ANOVA and regression JMP course from SAS Education. And this is going to come with instructor notes, with PowerPoint slides, with data sets, with exercises to assign to students, and a number of other things. So there's a lot of teaching resources developed by SAS Education that are available here as well. And then Books with JMP that I skipped over for a second. Books with JMP is a place that we put a number of books that either incorporate JMP into the textbook or come with a JMP add-in that allows you to access the data sets immediately in JMP. So this is not an exhaustive list of books that use JMP or that would work well with using JMP, but it is a list of a number of textbooks. And so if you see this little textbook add-in along with the name of the book, what this is a way for you to have your students access the data sets immediately within JMP. So you would click on the add-in, it would download, and when you open the add-in, I'll show you in JMP, it will show up in this add-ins menu. If you're new to JMP and you've not downloaded an add-in before, You won't see this add-ins as an option in your JMP toolbar until the first time you download an add-in. But once you start downloading add-ins, and you can see some of mine here, here's a couple that are the textbook add-ins. So this is from Roxy Peck's Statistics Learning from Data book. So if I click on this, what the add-in comes with is a JMP journal, and then the data sets by chapter. And so here I can just click on example 1 and I open the data set that's used for example 1. So if you are using any of these textbooks in your class and they happen to have a textbook add-in, that's a really easy way for your students to get access to the data very quickly. They would just download the add-in and be able to open the data sets directly inside JMP. There's also an add-ins tab, which has an exhaustive list of the books we're aware of that have an add-in. And so again, you can sort of, if you're considering different books to use for business stats and you want to see if the books you're considering have an add-in, you would check here. Okay, let's hop over to teaching resources to AP Stats resources. Don't be put off by this saying AP Stats if you're not an AP Stats teacher, because a lot of these resources are also going to be relevant if you're teaching intro stats. So if you are teaching AP Stats, there's some really great resources that are developed by other AP Stats instructors. But there's also these lab activities that are going to be relevant to a lot of people, not just AP Stats teachers. And I really like, so here's how you can download all the lab activities. You can download instructor notes on using them. And I really like this textbook correlation that tells you how these JMP lab activities correlate with certain textbooks. And so the textbooks that we're talking about here are the practice of statistics, blah, blah, blah. So this would tell you, here's the lab activities that have already been developed, and here's where they're going to fit in with the textbook of these 5 textbooks. So again, it's just another great resource to help you if you're teaching with one of these commonly used intro stat textbooks. We've already developed lab activities that you are welcome to use in your course. And so here's this PDF that tells you how our lab activities would match up with some of these common textbooks, or you're welcome to use them with any other textbook as well. And then the interactive learning tools, I mentioned before that you can access some of, so from the help menu in JMP, from sample data, under teaching resources, these teaching scripts, if you wanted to be able to get to these teaching scripts and things much faster without having to go through all these menus and submenus, if you go to the interactive tools for teaching and learning, you can download these as an add-in. So that instead of having to go through the help menu, through the sample data, instead you would go directly to add-ins and then just click on them right from your add-ins. So the interactive tools for teaching and learning are already built into JMP, but you can also download them as an add-in. And then student assessment brings you right over here to WebAssign, where JMP has a set of, I think, 140 questions in the JMP statistics question bank. So and you can click on the sample assignment to see JMP in action. And so what you're doing with the WebAssign questions that have already been developed is you're assigning a question that the students would be able to log into WebAssign and actually see the data that are necessary to answer the question right there in WebAssign. And this is interactive. You'd be able to click on the bars within the assignment. Okay, so I'm going to show you really quickly in my journal. I've linked to each of these things separately, but what we talked about are all of these. The Getting Started videos is right here. The Learning Library is right here. The Case Study Library is right here. There are a couple other case study sets as well that are not linked as directly from our website. There's a DOE case studies. So if you click on this link from the journal, this will take you to the DOE case studies and some videos teaching you about specific DOE. There's an info kit on teaching DOE in chemistry. Customer stories is another place to get just some good examples if you're teaching and you want to have some better examples. There's a lot of customer stories of how, for example, Dow Chemical has used JMP in order to present some data. So customer stories is a great place to go just for some motivated examples. The interactive learning tools we talked about, those are right on our webpage. the collections we're moving onto our web page, and so pretty soon these are going to be available directly here as well. But right now I'll show you quickly the collection for teaching regression is hosted on our user community. So if you're teaching regression, here's an example webinar, and then a lot of collections that we have in these other places. So the one-page guides that are going to be relevant to teaching regression are just listed right here. The case studies that are relevant to teaching regression are listed right here. Those JMP Lab intro lab activities from the AP Stats tab are available here. Some scripts are available here, other webinars and modules. So a collection of just a bunch of our tools from various places that are about regression modeling and analysis is in this collection. We have a similar collection for teaching predictive modeling. And again, these are going to be moved onto our web page, but right now you can access them on the community. And then we talked about the e-learning courses that you get a completion certificate with. These are free with the Academic Suite license. And these you can get to, again, directly from our webpage. We didn't talk about the Welcome Kit. This is another fun tool if you're just learning JMP. You can register for the roadmap Welcome Kit. And so you just step through a number of designed ways of exploring JMP. So this is a really fun tool as well, another thing you might assign to students. We talked about teaching materials from SAS, which are through the e-learning tab on our webpage. So going to JMP e-learning courses, you can get to the SAS education materials. We talked about the intro lab activities, which are in the AP Stats resource, and we talked about the WebAssign student assessment questions. We talked about books with JMP as well, which is right from our webpage. So there are a couple of links here in this long list, the DOE case studies, the DOE and chemistry case studies, and these collections that are not immediately available from our webpage, but most things are at this jump.com/teach. And then let's talk very briefly about the user community. We have a vibrant and very active user community. You can search for topics here on our user community. You can ask questions. You can find questions other people have asked before and get some answers. And we also have a bunch of academic user contributed course materials. So for example, course materials on modeling and data mining. So Bob Stein, a professor of statistics in the Wharton School of Business, shared materials from his course here. We have a number of other things. So I put links here to a lot of things that I found. It's not an exhaustive list. Please certainly search for things using the search bar in the community and entering the search terms of the type of course you're looking for should find any of the available materials. And then the JMP blog is not a part of our user community, but it's another place for you to get information about tips about using JMP more effectively. And there are a lot of interesting examples and things on the JMP blog. Okay, so let's just wrap up. I want to tell you again, the stuff that's hiding in the JMP help is so incredibly useful. So certainly go to the sample data and play around there a lot, but also use the documentation books. There are great examples in here. Use the tutorials. These are fantastic. Go to the tip of the day to get a little bit more effective and efficient. Definitely go to our jump.com/teach and look at those webinars and videos. Look through the learning library and the specific one-page topics, the 2 to 3 minute videos. Go through our case study library and find examples that'll work in your class. Certainly use the sample data and interactive demos. Download them to the add-ins if you're using them a lot and you think that's more useful. And go to our user community and then ask us questions at academic@jump.com or send me a question at ruth.hummel@jump.com, and I'd be happy to direct you to the resources that are going to help you with your particular needs. All right, well, thanks everyone.